Very nice to see all of you here today. As Ariana already told you, Carl and I will be presenting results of the review that actually try to synthesize evidence on gender equality and social inclusion outcomes in not only water, but also any type of WASH interventions in Global South context. So why we did this review to start with? Well, we were actually responding to a synthesis gap. Despite a wide range of GESI outcomes associated with WASH interventions, evidence has often been anecdotal and based on assumptions or reported only in the grey literature. And a greater emphasis was always placed on rigorous evaluation of technical and health outcomes of WASH intervention. First of all, I realized I mentioned the word GESI, and then I realized that not all of you are familiar with that. So GESI stands for Gender Equality and Social Inclusion, and WASH stands obviously for Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene. So the issues about gender were only, as I said, the contextual factors in WASH intervention design or adoption. Gender is was not at the first focus according to our scoping analysis before conducting this synthesis of the literature. However, you will see there are some surprises there. So past reviews that also explicitly focus on social outcomes, so non-public health and technical outcomes, such as diarrhea in this case, or stunting. Well, those reviews were narrow in scope at the time when we started this review, and they were also outdated. There was a 3IA evidence gap map that's been recently updated, and it included some outcomes that were relevant also for this review, but they were mostly focusing on quantitative evidence. In our case, we were deciding to include quantitative, qualitative, and mixed method evidence. So our review question was, what evidence exists on the impact of WASH intervention on inclusive and transformative GESI, or gender equality and social inclusion outcomes in low and middle income countries? So throughout this presentation, you will hear me and Carla talking about inclusive outcomes, transformative outcomes, but GESI mainstreaming. So what is that? Inclusive outcomes are actually referring to outcomes that are connected to improving access and use of WASH for all users. So this could be something like provision of water at more convenient locations, toilets that are adapted to cultural practices, fair tariff structures, sharing of information, female-friendly toilets, etc. On the other hand, transformative outcomes in connection to WASH relate to women or other social groups gaining greater control of their lives. So this would be obtaining expertise in management, in managing a water resource, or gaining financial autonomy through WASH entrepreneurship and similar. So it really brings about the change. So what are we talking when we say WASH, GESI mainstreaming in WASH interventions? Well, WASH interventions are increasingly mainstreaming gender equality and social inclusion components in their design, and this is done to promote positive change in GESI outcomes at any stage of WASH programming. And GESI mainstreaming is often viewed as having the dual purpose of improving the sustainability and effectiveness of the technical and health outcomes, but also as promoting positive change, because regardless of whether a WASH intervention includes intentional mainstreaming, it will still have social and gendered outcomes. So why not make sure that these social and gender outcomes are positive or perhaps non-negative. Okay, so we will now proceed to showing results from this review, and I will just start by saying that we really searched both academic and grey literature on this topic. We started with over 70,000 records with our initial search on multiple databases in multiple sources. And we at the end of the review process, we ended up with 463 studies included in this review, and these 463 studies were spread across 499 reports. So I will stop here and hand over to my colleague Carla, who will tell you a little bit more about the results.
Thank you very much, Biljana. Yeah, I'll go on with the results. So as you can see here, it's the map. And as we can see, most of the map studies in this evidence base were located in India, Bangladesh, and Kenya. And there's very limited information on other geographical regions, like, for instance, Latin America or West Africa. So this is very important to note. I think if Biljana will share the atlas map on the chat, if she can't right now. If not, she'll share it later today. Next one, please, Biljana. Thank you. Here we see how the studies were split across the water and sanitation and hygiene sector. So as we notice on the bar above, it's a little over half of the studies in the evidence base focus on water supply, mainly quantity and quality, followed by sanitation with 43% and hand washing with 32%. Very little of them were focusing on MHM or menstrual health management and other types of hygiene, such as showering, for instance. Next, Biljana, please. So here we map 25 GESI outcome themes, including 12 inclusive and 12 transformative themes. So Biljana already talked about them in the beginning of the presentation. A total of 435 studies reported inclusive outcome themes. So this is visible in the red lines. So if you see the red lines, those are the inclusive themes. So this is basically a bit over 90% of the studies focused on improving access and use of WASH for all users. And as we can see the bars above, some of the most reported inclusive outcomes themes were access and use of safe water supply, knowledge of WASH, and use of sanitations and service quality. Now, on the other hand, only 142 studies, which is around 42, measured transformative GESI outcomes. This is visible in blue, so the blue lines, which, as we already mentioned, relate to changes in existing gender norms and other power relations. Biljana talked about changes in a person's life, basically. So some of the most reported transformative outcomes were time use, and we don't mean time use as water collection use, but in general, overall, like time use for me to go meet with my friends, time use for me to go educate myself. Participation in WASH-related decision-making activities and education. Next, please, Biljana. So what we're seeing here is the subjects for which the GESI outcomes were reported. So who were the subjects? Who were these outcomes reported on? So it's not talking about the intervention, but the outcomes. Please have that in mind because we'll talk about the interventions later on. So as we can see, mainly 43% did not show, 43% of the studies did not show disaggregated outcome data. And we can also see that most of the outcomes were reported in relation to women. So first of all, there's the low, so the purple line is not disaggregated data, and then it's women. A few were on men, and then girls, children, and boys. And there were absolutely no outcomes reported on sexual and gender minorities, and very few on people with disabilities and people elderly, so over 65 years of age. Next, please, Biljana. So here we're going to spend a few minutes. So that was for the outcomes. And now we're going to spend a few minutes talking about the studies that have interventions with GESI mainstreaming components. So I'm going to refer a bit back to what Biljana was mentioning. And here we're talking about the interventions. So not the outcomes, which we already talked about, but the interventions. Next, please, Biljana. So out of the 463 studies in the evidence, only 22, so around 104 studies, included a GESI component. The majority of these GESI components involved were capacity building. So for example, training for women to improve their participation or being entrepreneurs in a business. participation and leadership opportunities, so for them to become financially independent, or inclusion in committees, product provision, so for example, provision of filters, cups, and hygiene kits, infrastructure provision, so meaning hardware specifically, like toilets and water station water pipes, and some financial support such as loans and tariffs subsidized and microloans. Next, Liana, please. So what we can see here is who is the target of the intervention with the GESI mainstreaming. So here, the majority of the interventions, as we can see, it's women, the women and girls mainly. They're very seldom targeting children or adults over 60. And as we mentioned before, there's no mention on gender minorities. So this is very important to note for all practitioners out there, that we're really not considering all genders beyond women and girls. And this is important to know because we have to kind of, oh, I guess Liliana will interact further with this, but I just wanted to point this out because we found this to be very relevant and kind of key to bring to the discussion on what gender going beyond women and girls means. Now back to you, Liliana.
Thank you so much, Carla. I'm just going to summarize a little bit and then provide implications for research policy and practice, and then we can open up for a discussion. So we thought that perhaps on this topic, when we're talking about GESI outcomes, I hope what GESI means is clear so far. So talking about GESI outcomes and WASH interventions in particular. So we thought that perhaps more research is needed in diverse regions of the world and diverse settings, because we saw that majority of the evidence comes from basically 3 countries that we could find out there published. So it was from India, Kenya, and Bangladesh. Then it would be good that what we've done is just map the literature, but we haven't actually studied the effects of interventions with GESI mainstreaming, whether they're really improving GESI outcomes or not. So this map could serve as a basis for such investigations. And we also see the gap in the research on transformative outcomes. There is a reason perhaps why it's so, because it's quite hard to capture sometimes, often, but perhaps not all the time, transformative outcomes. So yeah, these are some future research directions for researchers in the crowd. When it comes to WASH policy and practice, we believe that, and based on these findings, we need to design interventions for positive GESI outcomes. So really insist on GESI mainstreaming and also evaluation, as I said, of GESI mainstreaming. Obviously, there is a need for targeting a diverse gender and social groups. So we see that focus is mostly on women and girls, but what about other genders, as Carla also pointed. And also there is a need for us to be better at measuring gender equality and social inclusion outcomes, though obviously it can be complicated, but there are tools out there that are trying to grapple with this complicated issue. So here's the last slide from us. Here you will find a link to our protocol for this review, and followed by a reference for where you can find a complete review published, and also some reference for where the entire project information is posted. So thank you very much.